Rudolf Höss, Auschwitz. Rudolf Höss was the first and longest-serving commandant of Auschwitz, holding the position from 1940 to 1943, and again briefly in 1944. A veteran of the SS, he was tasked with transforming Auschwitz from a detention site for Polish prisoners into the largest extermination center of the Holocaust. Under his command, gas chambers and crematoria were constructed, and the industrialized murder of Jews, Roma, and other targeted groups began on a scale never seen before. Höss oversaw the introduction of Zyklon B as a killing method and developed the system that allowed Auschwitz to become the deadliest camp of the Holocaust, with more than 1 million people murdered there. He personally monitored the efficiency of extermination processes, keeping meticulous records of deaths and deportations, which later provided crucial evidence at the Nuremberg trials. Höss maintained strict discipline among the guards and systematically eliminated prisoners who resisted or were deemed unfit for labor. He also coordinated with the Reich Security Main Office to ensure deportations from across Europe reached Auschwitz on schedule. After the war, he was captured by British forces, testified at Nuremberg, and was executed in 1947 near the crematorium of Auschwitz itself. Franz Ziereis, Mauthausen. Franz Ziereis served as commandant of Mauthausen from 1939 until 1945. Mauthausen was infamous as a site of extermination through labor. Prisoners were forced to haul massive stone blocks up the camp's so-called stairs of death, often collapsing under the weight, only to be beaten or killed by guards. Ziereis expanded Mauthausen into a vast complex of nearly 50 subcamps, tightly connected to Germany's arms production. He enforced a regime of constant terror, implementing routine punishments, executions, and forced marches. Ziereis often personally inspected work details, beating prisoners and ensuring that camp quotas for deaths and labor output were met. Tens of thousands of people died from starvation, exhaustion, and outright murder under his command. As the Allies approached, Ziereis fled, but was captured by US troops and died from gunshot wounds shortly afterward. Karl Otto Koch, Buchenwald and Majdanek. Karl Otto Koch was the first commandant of Buchenwald, and later Majdanek. At Buchenwald, beginning in 1937, Koch presided over a regime of terror, marked by executions, brutality, and corruption. He and his wife, Ilse, became notorious for embezzling money and valuables stolen from prisoners, as well as for sadistic treatment of inmates. Koch personally supervised executions and interrogations, ensuring fear and absolute obedience among prisoners and subordinates alike. Transferred to Majdanek in 1941, Koch repeated his pattern of corruption, nepotism, and inefficiency. Eventually, even the SS deemed him too corrupt to remain in command. He was arrested, tried, and executed by his own organization in 1945, one of the rare cases where a Nazi camp leader was punished by the regime itself. His career demonstrates the intertwining of personal greed and systemic brutality within the camp hierarchy. Richard Baer, Auschwitz and Dora-Mittelbau. Richard Baer began his career as an SS officer at Sachsenhausen and Dachau before rising to become commandant of Auschwitz in 1944, replacing Arthur Liebehenschel. He continued the deportations and exterminations during the final phase of the Holocaust. Baer oversaw the organization of transports, prisoner selections, and forced labor details. He also coordinated the death marches when the Red Army approached, forcing tens of thousands of prisoners on brutal marches toward camps deeper inside Germany. Later, as commandant of Dora-Mittelbau, he managed prisoners forced to build V-2 rockets in underground tunnels under inhumane conditions. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion claimed tens of thousands of lives. Baer meticulously supervised the camp's operations, inspected punishments, and maintained strict control over prisoners and staff. He went into hiding after the war, but was captured in 1960, dying in custody in 1963 before he could stand trial. Josef Kramer, Bergen-Belsen. Josef Kramer, often called the Beast of Belsen, served as commandant of Bergen-Belsen during its most notorious period. Before Belsen, he had served at Dachau, Mauthausen, and Auschwitz, participating in selections for the gas chambers. In 1944, he was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, initially a prisoner exchange camp. By 1945, the camp became overwhelmed with sick and starving prisoners, and conditions collapsed completely. Kramer enforced brutal punishments, supervised overcrowded barracks, and allowed disease to spread unchecked. Tens of thousands died under his command, and he personally ensured no prisoner escaped without severe consequences. When British troops liberated the camp in April 1945, they discovered piles of corpses and tens of thousands of emaciated survivors. Kramer was captured on sight, tried by a British military court, and executed in December 1945. Arthur Liebehenschel, Auschwitz and Majdanek. Arthur Liebehenschel replaced Rudolf Höss as commandant of Auschwitz in late 1943. His tenure was short, but he made certain administrative changes, such as reducing arbitrary beatings and eliminating some forms of punishment. However, mass killings and forced labor continued under his command. In May 1944, he was transferred to Majdanek, where he continued as commandant until the camp's evacuation. Liebehenschel's leadership, while slightly less brutal than some predecessors, remained complicit in the extermination system. After the war, he was tried in Poland, convicted of crimes against humanity, and executed in 1948. Paul Werner Hoppe, Stutthof. Paul Werner Hoppe became commandant of Stutthof, near Danzig, in 1942. Stutthof was the first camp established outside pre-war Germany and held tens of thousands of political prisoners, Jews, and forced laborers. Under Hoppe's command, gas chambers were introduced in 1944, and tens of thousands were murdered. As the Soviet army advanced in 1945, Hoppe ordered mass evacuations, resulting in death marches in which thousands perished. Captured after the war, he was tried in West Germany in 1955, sentenced to 9 years, and later released, living quietly until his death in 1974. Oswald Pohl, SS Economic and Administrative Main Office. Although not a camp commandant, Oswald Pohl was perhaps the most important administrator of the concentration camp system. As head of the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, he oversaw budgets, forced labor deployment, and the construction of gas chambers and crematoria. Pohl turned the camps into centers of economic exploitation, contracting prisoner labor to German industries while facilitating mass extermination. He coordinated closely with individual camp commandants, ensuring a consistent system of terror and murder. Convicted in the Pohl trial of 1947, he was executed in 1951. Hans Loritz, Dachau. Hans Loritz served as commandant of Dachau from 1936 to 1939. A brutal SS officer, he expanded Dachau into a model camp that was later used as a blueprint for others. Under Loritz, thousands of political opponents, Jews, and other targeted groups were imprisoned, tortured, and killed. He oversaw the establishment of Dachau's notorious punishment block and directly supervised the training of future SS camp leaders. Later transferred to the occupied Soviet Union, he commanded police and SS units involved in mass shootings. Captured in 1946, he committed suicide in Allied custody. Max Kogel, Flossenbürg, and Majdanek. Max Kogel was an SS officer who commanded both Flossenbürg and Majdanek. At Flossenbürg, prisoners were subjected to forced labor in granite quarries and later in armaments production. Kogel enforced brutal discipline and oversaw executions. Transferred to Majdanek in 1942, he continued managing extermination operations and the deportation of Jews and other targeted groups. He briefly commanded Ravensbrück, a camp for women, before being captured after the war. Kogel committed suicide in 1946 before facing trial. Alexander Piorkowski, Dachau. Alexander Piorkowski served as commandant of Dachau from 1939 to 1942. Under his administration, Dachau became both a site of mass imprisonment and a training ground for SS officers, many of whom went on to command other concentration camps. Piorkowski expanded forced labor, using prisoners in arms production, agriculture, and construction. Conditions were appalling, with rampant disease, malnutrition, and brutality. He directly ordered executions and enforced collective punishments for minor infractions. After the war, he was tried by an American military court in the Dachau trials, found guilty of crimes against humanity, and executed in 1948.